Can you beat Resident Evil 7 without turning the camera? No. But I still tried to do that. Now, if you know anything about Resident Evil 7, you know that it's the first-person mainline Resident Evil game. This means that the game is heavily reliant on you, the player, moving the camera around as a substitute for the main protagonist's eyes. So I wanted to see how difficult the game would be if you had no control over where you were looking. So I started up a new game of Resident Evil 7 with the intention of not moving the camera at all. I decided to pick easy since I figured boss fights would be pretty difficult without being able to actually aim, and I don't think the difficulty really is the focus of this challenge. Before I even started, I realized I have to use a controller because if you use mouse and keyboard, you need to press the mouse button to shoot. And in doing so, you're going to inadvertently move the mouse, even just a tiny bit, which will realign the camera. So a controller was pretty much a must. And at the top left of the screen, there's a overlay of what button I'm pressing and when, and me moving the stick registers there. So if that moves, that means I moved the stick. So, that was there just to keep me in line, make sure that I didn't slip up and accidentally touch it. And before you even have control over Ethan while you're driving in his car, you have the option and the prompt to use right stick to look around. Honestly, I almost instinctively did this, but luckily I didn't, because you actually have to watch the whole introduction cutscene. There's no option to skip it, so it was bad enough having to rewatch it for like the 20th time, so I'm glad I didn't have to do that yet again. The little introductory walk is not bad at all. You don't have to turn the camera in any way. You make your way past the house, past the van. You see Jack through the corner of your eye as you're walking down, and then you're met with your first challenge. There's this little rope thingy with birds that you have to crouch under to proceed. Now, I immediately realized that to crouch, you push down the right stick, which will inadvertently move the camera because it's pretty hard to push down on an analog stick without moving it ever so slightly. So I paused the game to look and see if I could rebind crouch, and I didn't really see controller binds, so I decided that if I ever needed to crouch, I was going to press C on the keyboard. So I would be swapping between keyboard and mouse and controller controls. So not a very big roadblock, but something to keep in mind. Never accidentally crouch with the controller, because you're probably going to move the camera, and even a slight movement of the camera technically would count as moving the camera. So, that is why using C on the keyboard is pretty important. Now you're able to get to the guest house with relatively no issues. You just kind of have to stare at some rocks and walls and not really know where you are, but as long as you follow the path, everything's fine. But I actually got a little stuck right when I got in front of the guest house, because for some reason I thought the front door was way farther left than it actually was. So I spent a solid 3 minutes trying to back onto the porch, because you're facing the complete opposite direction of the front door. But luckily I realized that there's a map. So I opened up the map and saw that I was actually way off from the front door. And I eventually moved over and finally made my way to the front door, which is wide open, and I backed on in and backed in through the next door. And then I was officially inside of the house. Now, obviously, I'm playing through the game with knowledge of how to progress through, so there's no reason for me to find the VHS and watch that to find the secret pulley to get into the basement. So my first goal was, I gotta be able to pull the lever and go down the ladder. And lucky me, the direction you're facing is perfect to just make your way into that room, crouch down with the keyboard, and pull the lever. Now, I thought this was going to be really smooth sailing, but once you're in that secret room, you actually cannot back down the ladder, I found. You have to be facing it, and the ladder is in the complete opposite direction that you're facing. So I went back out into the house and started looking for things that could possibly turn me. And the first place I went was upstairs, and I kind of looked at the button and thought that since that is an animation, it would turn me, but it would only turn me ever so slightly to the left and not completely around, so I didn't even bother with it. And I headed over to the save slot and realized saving is going to be an issue. And luckily, the position I'm in right now allowed me to save, so I saved over one of my many save files, because this was the point that I realized saving would not be a luxury always available to me. After saving my game, I slowly walked backwards down the stairs and started looking around the kitchen, and I realized that the little pot that you can open on the kitchen table is an animation where Ethan brushes the cockroaches off his wrist, and when he does that, he is facing about 90 degrees to the left of where I was facing at this very moment. Now, that's not the full 180-degree turn that I needed, but it was progress at the very least. The only issue was I wasn't able to even interact with that pot. I tried crouching, standing, trying to interact with it while in the act of crouching and standing, but nothing was letting me work with it. So I spent a pretty long time walking around the house looking for anything that would help me, and after about 5 to 10 minutes of me wandering aimlessly, very slowly walking sideways and backwards, I came all the way back to the front door that locks on you when you first enter the house. And I went to open it to see if something outside could help me, and then I realized there's an animation when Ethan tries to leave. It actually shows you jiggling the doorknob trying to leave. And once that animation finishes, you're looking a lot lower down than you were before. And with this nice new view of the floor, you're actually able to walk back to the pot and kind of wiggle your feet around until you have the perfect angle to see the interact button with that pot. So at this point, I was going to see if I was able to grab onto the ladder having turned this much. Maybe Ethan would like grab onto it now that I wasn't completely facing the wrong direction. And while I was on my way there, I realized that there's a piano in that room that you can interact with that will turn me even more. But I decided to wait and not use it just in case I needed it at a later time, because you do come back through here. But when I went to the ladder, I found out that he was not grabbing onto it. So I went back to the piano, interacted, and I turned yet again, this time perfectly facing the direction I needed to go straight down the ladder. Now, after actually going down the ladder and getting into the basement, this is where things got really difficult. You see, you come to these little cement ceiling parts that Ethan has to kind of shimmy under. And in order to go underneath them, he has to kind of be facing them. And unfortunately, the second one he has to go under is completely to the right of him. Nice 90-degree angle. I tried a bunch of stuff here. I tried walking along the edges and somehow hoping that I could interact with it and get underneath it. But there was literally no way to get under this wall. So I'll save you from the 10 minutes of experimentation that I did here and just say, you have to turn the camera enough to get under the wall. So like I kind of spoiled at the beginning, you cannot beat this game without looking around. But that doesn't mean I'm not going to try to do it in the least amount as possible. So this is where I decided that there would be a bit of rules as to what constitutes a turn and what I will count as a singular turn. So basically a turn is moving the camera via the right analog stick in order to be able to interact with an object or progress any further. Meaning it doesn't matter how far I turn the camera, it's just a singular instance of having to realign the camera counts as one turn. Now, if for some reason you're very well acquainted with Resident Evil 7 controls, you'll know that there's a quick turn ability in the game. And what a quick turn is basically you hold back on the walking analog stick, meaning the left one, which you use to move your feet around, and you press B, which turns you a complete 180-degree angle without you technically moving the camera. Now, that would not have helped me get under the little concrete ceiling earlier, but there are quite a few instances where it is very helpful. So I decided that quick turning will still count as turning the camera, but I'll count it separately, because I don't want to just be able to 180 whenever I'm inconveniently walking backwards. But if I'm able to quick turn rather than actually turn the analog stick, I'll do that. So I'll have a separate counter for quick turns and then a counter for regular analog stick movement. Speaking of all that turning terminology, there's yet another mandatory turn coming up where you have to pick up the bolt cutters to free Mia. Quick turning is not helpful in this situation, so it does count as a standard turn. But picking up those pliers puts us in a situation where we are 180 degrees in the wrong direction from actually opening Mia's cell. So we immediately follow this up with a quick turn and add our first quick turn to the counter. While we follow Mia for that painfully long dialogue bit where you walk through the little meat rooms and stuff, there's actually a part where you have to shimmy through, and that'll realign your camera a little bit. There's no turning required here. And when you get to the little secret room with her, you're actually facing the complete opposite direction of the stairs, which once she finally busts through the wall in her fit of random moldy rage, you actually walk up those stairs backwards and are able to go into the bathroom backwards and pick up the healing item. At this point, Mia's knocking on the basement door, and we're at the perfect angle to just walk on down the stairs in the right direction, I might add. and everything plays out nice and easy, and we finally get to the part where Mia gets back up off the ground and is ready to start killing you. And luckily for us, Ethan picks up the hatchet of his own volition, and you're able to just swing away at her. It's pretty easy, especially on easy difficulty, just to keep clicking until she takes her quick 1-minute nap. At this point, the phone rings, and we're in the perfect position to pick up the phone and talk to Zoe. And we're also able to pick the hatchet back up off the floor since our face is perfectly positioned at the ground still. Unfortunately, we are met with another impasse, and I'll spare you all the details of me looking around, trying to interact with things, and slightly changing my camera perspective, just to come to the conclusion that we have to do yet another quick turn in order to use the bolt cutters on the cabinet to get the fuse. However, before I did that quick turn, I found out that after you save and reload, Ethan is in the exact same place that you were standing, however his head is at an even level. So while this trick wasn't particularly useful yet, it is something to take note of in the future, that there is a way to reset head level if you are able to get to a save point. Now we're faced with the issue of getting the fuse in the box, as we need to raise our camera up and to the right to actually interact with it. With the direction that our character is now facing, we can interact with the sink as well as the fridge in the kitchen to slightly alter the way that we're looking, but neither of those animations help us in the slightest in getting our camera up and to the right. So this is where we add yet another normal turn to the counter, and you'll see that I position myself in a very specific way to put the fuse in because I know I have to push the button in the attic right after this. So I lined myself up so that I would be facing towards the button after putting the fuse in, instead of putting it in straight on. But then I was reminded by Mia that that doesn't matter because there's a cutscene when you walk out and she stabs your hand, and this means we are yet again facing the wrong direction to interact with what we need to interact with. So with that, we use our 180-degree quick turn yet again to hit the button to get into the attic. This is where we would normally get a pistol to fight Mia with, but unfortunately we are just out of reach of it as it's a little bit to the left of where we're looking. So we progress towards where the actual boss fight takes place, just to find out that you have to be facing the ladder towards the exit to actually start the boss fight. I actually spent a good bit of time looking for a way to turn myself here. All I could come up with was picking up the phone that Zoe calls you on again, but all that did was make me look down. On the bright side, I was able to pick my hand up on my way back up the stairs, but yet again had to turn in order to progress here. The fight itself was not extremely tricky, but I was whiffing a lot of my swings on Mia because her head goes really low, and my axe was kind of just grazing her scalp as I tried to end the fight, and it was pretty close. I was one hit away from death, but luckily easy mode made it so I only had to hit her maybe 20 or so times and she fell down. And I was a little worried after the fight that I would have to turn to get Jack to punch me and knock me out because I was walking around for a good bit and nothing was happening. But eventually he showed up and punched me in the face, and he started dragging me towards the next part of the game. So with that, the guest house was completed with a total of 4 turns using the analog stick and 3 quick turns. I'm not usually one for breaking videos like this into parts, but considering I took 13 minutes now to do just the first part of the game, I think I'm going to break it into at least 3 more chunks. And as I get deeper into the videos, I'll probably spend less time explaining the more mundane details of slowly turning my head 90 degrees to the left. But then again, that's part of the fun, so maybe I won't cut that out. But the main house has tons of fun little techniques to manipulate your amount of times that you touch the analog stick, so hopefully you'll stick around for that. If the next part's already out, it should be on the screen somewhere. But if not, have a good day, and thank you for watching.